All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining us during your lunch hour today. And thanks for joining us for another KSI Alumni Virtual Learning opportunity. The Career and Alumni Department is really excited to be able to continue to provide you all some really unique virtual experiences while you are working from home. So thanks for taking the time today to join us. Before we get started with our presenter, just a couple webinar norms that I just want to throw out there. This will be a pretty interactive webinar today. So Kristine, our facilitator, will prompt you as to what that participation will look like. But just keep in mind that the chat box will be open and monitored throughout the webinar. We do ask that you keep your lines muted for the most part, just so that we can make sure that we don't have any background or static issues. And if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, you don't feel comfortable unmuting yourself, whatever the case may be, feel free to shoot that information through the chat box. You can send it to everyone or you can send it to one particular person. It does not matter. And we will be recording this webinar so that we can share it with the rest of the Alumni Association. So please keep that in mind that as you participate, we will also be featuring that on the recording that we'll send out. So without further ado, before I hand it over, today's webinar is the future of work in leadership. We're really excited to have our guest facilitator with us today. Kristine Sloan is the CEO of Solaire Strategies. I actually met Kristine a couple years ago through a Starting Block Fellowship. She is a brilliant mind, and we're really excited to have her expertise with us today. This is a really timely topic. And I think for where a lot of our alumni are currently in their professional and personal lives, a lot of the items we're going to talk about today should really hit home. So we're really excited to have her with us today. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kristine.
Thank you. Hey, y'all. I am going to share my screen now. And everyone. So I also had these logistical slides, so thanks, Lisa, for going through it so I don't have to. Just a quick one. I really do like interacting, and so there's this reactions tab on Zoom. If I'm asking a question and you're like yes, no, you can add the reaction, thumbs up, thumbs down. Other people can see it. If there's something that's being said that you really resonates with you, or that you completely disagree with, that's cool. You can unmute, you can add the thumbs up, you can add the thumbs down. Just feel free to participate. I want this to be fluid as much as possible while we're in the online environment. So I'm Kristine. My pronouns are she, her. I have Scottish and Native American heritage, and I identify as white. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is my hometown. And I've been thinking about the future in work and leadership really for a long time, but very rigorously, I would say, for the last 5 years. I was leading Starting Block, which is a global leadership development nonprofit. And through that, almost daily conversations on the landscape of work and leadership. And then I think just from a values perspective, what's underneath the trends that people are talking about. So in this conversation, I'm going to be presenting both the kind of forecasted trends of the future of work and leadership, but also the mindsets underneath work, the mindsets underneath economy, the mindsets when we say good leader, what does that mean? And really hoping to engage y'all through that. We'll be in small group conversations and all together in our larger group throughout the time. If you are able and comfortable, I'd love if you could turn your video on throughout this webinar. I just find it it's easier to see, it's better, I think, to see one another's faces and just gauge reactions that way. So totally respect if that doesn't feel good for you. But if you are able, then we'd love to see your face. All right. Any questions on process or flow? No? Cool. All right, let's get started. I want to start just by grounding us together. I don't know what y'all have been doing this morning, but just wanted to arrive in space. I'm going to call us into just 1 minute of mindful breathing. And if you are able to put your legs on the ground or on a surface, both of your feet, and if you're comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes. You'll hear some chimes at the end of 1 minute. And start. So you can just kind of notice at the beginning standard patterns of breathing. Start to bring a little bit more attention. Going to call us into taking a deeper breath. So we're going to inhale on a count of 4, exhale on a count of 5. So together, inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, and exhale 2, 3, 4, 5. You can keep that pattern going for the remainder of the minute. All right, thanks. Hey, everybody. So to get us started on this conversation of work and leadership, I wanted to have the opportunity to just quickly break into small groups and everybody be able to respond to some questions. If these don't feel like the right questions for you, use other ones, and you certainly don't have to answer all of them. So the first one, how are you feeling? How's your community? How is work showing up in your life right now? What are you noticing about your own leadership that you want to sit with or work with more? And in the last few months, what have you learned about work and leadership that is compelling for you? I want to honor that we're having this conversation on the future of work and leadership in the middle of a pandemic. And while we are in some ways being confronted or asked to experiment with new ways of working and leading, it's also in the context of like an event that is we're collectively experiencing as trauma. So I think there's just a lot to unpack, and I want to at least spend some time here unpacking it together. So I'm going to break us into small groups. You're going to be in a group of about 3 to 4 people. And really just answering that question of like, what's up for you right now and what are you noticing? So I'm going to do these they'll be random. And all right, I'm going to open them now. You'll be in the breakout group for about 3 people. So we'll be in the breakout group for, let's say, 10 minutes. Really give you some space to have a conversation about what's happening. Each person will have 3 minutes to share. I ask that somebody keep time. One of the things we'll talk about in our conversation are practices of equity, and one of the ones I found to be the easiest to implement is timed rounds. So 3 minutes each person. I'll give y'all a cue when we're halfway through, and then you'll get a cue when you have a minute left. All right? Hi, Kiva.
Yes, can you hear me?
Hey, yeah, I can hear you. I'm going to put you in a breakout room, okay?
Okay, thank you. I've been having connectivity issues, so
Oh,
I'm
no.
glad it worked this time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So you're going to be in breakout room 2, and it's going to cue you right now. So you can kind of just press like yes to go to the room.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I hope that time was good. Anybody want to share something that seemed really compelling or something that you were maybe even surprised that you were sharing in the group? You can also comment in the chat box if that's better for you.
Hello, this is Kiva. Just a quick question. Can y'all see me?
No.
Okay. I can see me, so I don't know what's going on. But I did want to say something that I was sharing when the breakout rooms ended was that I don't know about everyone else, but I'm graduating this week actually with my master's. So so one of the more fitting questions that arose from the prompts here is more I'm doing great right now with the jobs that I have right now and working remotely and everything like that. But once this is all over and I'm looking for my first career in my field instead of just an internship, it's a bit concerning because, you know, the whole job outlook, my specific field, I feel like there will be a lot of job opportunities because that can include change management, executive coaching, and things like that. But I feel like they'll be looking for more experienced talent because they'll want to be able to have quick solutions and everything like that, considering this pandemic and the changing organizational structures. And I just feel like since I only have internship experience, I won't be an attractive talent, basically. And Autumn was telling me, which also aligns with the article I read that said one benefit from going through this as a young professional is that you'll be able to have so many experiences that you can communicate and solutions that will be innovative and things like that. So that was a good reminder. And I think one thing I will just struggle with that is since my experience is so limited, being able to articulate how my experiences during this time will be beneficial or innovative to a potential employer.
Yeah.
I know that was a lot.
No, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of empathy for that. I graduated my undergrad in 2009 with an economics degree. So right after the financial crisis.
Right.
Yeah. I don't have an answer. I think I appreciate you sharing that. And I can definitely understand that anxiety. And I do think the skills, we'll talk about this later, but the skills that you have or that you mentioned are actually like super what is needed in the future. So I hope you can hold on to the trust in yourself as you enter the job market. But yeah, I just have a lot of empathy there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to echo what Kristine said, because if you talk to a lot of the older millennials, we feel that pain because, yeah, many of us graduated college during the last recession. So granted, I know it's different, but I mean, we are headed that way. So if you ever need advice, but I think the good thing is we all ended up where we ended up, and things, even though it may seem bleak right now, just hang in there. Because I remember having those feelings when I was graduating college too. The job market was terrible, and I had all this debt and all this worry, and things just ended up working out. So just have faith in that. But you're definitely not alone. There's a lot of people feeling that, and the older millennials who went through that, 10 plus years ago, we feel your pain for sure.
Yeah. The advantage this time is that thanks to Kaufman, I don't have any debt to worry about.
Woohoo! That's exciting.
I didn't have that problem. I didn't have that.
Anybody else want to share something that came up for them in their conversation before we move on? All right. So I'm going to do an overview of our economy, how that bleeds into our work cultures, how that bleeds into how we think about leadership. I'm going to go through kind of the current state right now. I'm going to illustrate a potential vision for what it could look like in the future. And then I'm going to ask each of you to individually kind of just think through how you would envision the future for those. So that's going to be our next kind of like pacing. So here's how I would characterize the status of the economy, work, and leadership right now. So current status quo of the economy, we really, as you know, and I'll say, I think this is globally applicable, but really through as well the US lens here, that it is the maximization of profit and efficiency over anything else, right? Like maximize profit for the shareholder, that drives so much of the economy and the paradigms of the economy. We have this paradigm of winners take all and bigger is better. So there's this sense that if you, quote, made a lot of money or work for a big company or have built a big company, that one, you earned it, you deserve the rewards, you shouldn't have to support other people, and that it is, you are like a better, this is better. This is judged as better in our economy. We can see this through the ways that, you know, Amazon funds its CEO, right? Or Amazon's business practices, right? And the fact that Amazon is really celebrated in our culture. And I say celebrated by the fact that like so many people engage with it, right? And then at the heart of our economy is structural racism and bias. That also bleeds into ableism, ageism, and patriarchy. We also have at the heart of our economy a lot of transactional interaction. So the way that we think about interacting within the economy tends to be through the lens of transaction. That's where the value is. If you talk to any economist, right, it's like, what's the value of this interaction? What's the value of your time? Grow your network, do these things, right? So these are kind of like the paradigms and the norms that underlie what we see as a good economy or our economy. If at any time y'all are like, yep, feel free to add that reaction. You click reaction, thumbs up. If you're like, no way, this is not true, thumbs down reaction. So moving into work and how this kind of like informs our work. And I want to say that like I've separated these into 3 different columns, but y'all know they are so intersecting, and because they intersect, they multiply each other, right? So for work, if we're maximizing profit and efficiency in our economy, there's a lot of conversation about how do you maximize productivity, right? How do we get the most out of our people? If you're not working at maximum productivity, like your labor is not valued as much. And this is coming up a lot in this moment in the pandemic, where people are like, productivity is not my number one concern right now. You know, showing up is my number one concern right now. That's it. That's what I got. But our kind of work culture doesn't really value that. So there's a lot of rethinking of work culture in this moment. That's interesting. We have a lot of like work culture centered around competition, bureaucracy. There's a command and control kind of environment. That command and control environment comes out of factory workers and compliance, which comes out of a legacy of racism and enslaved labor in this country. So there's all of that's a strong thread. There's this like mindset of scarcity in our work culture. Like we don't have enough, we have to get it. We're combating this a lot right now as well, where we really do feel scarcity. And so then, you know, how do we step into more abundance? Our work culture, because we live with structures of racism and ableism, ageism, patriarchy, we then have privilege and barriers to access and growth in our work cultures. And we're really more focused on results instead of relationship. I can't tell you how many times, I don't know if y'all have heard this, but this notion of like, okay, yeah, go to that conference so that you can get us a new deal so we can work with these people. Not like go build community. That's good enough, right? Like that is not the way that we kind of think about relationship in terms of work. And then where that like bleeds into leadership is that we then have this like culture of monitoring. So you get like the micromanager. excessive and unfocused meetings because we don't trust one another. We kind of infantilize one another. We treat people like, well, if you're not in the meeting, you're not paying attention. We have this culture where it's like a good leadership style if you're getting your information from the people that you're seeking to serve, but you're making decisions on their behalf. So this like inflow flows up, decisions flow down culture, instead of info and decisions are lying within the people you're seeking to serve. Or the reverse, I would argue, like, how can we have our leaders doing the research, creating the info, funneling that to the communities they seek to serve and having them make decisions? That could be interesting. We also have a culture of like heroes and perpetrators. This comes out of that winners take all kind of culture, right? Like, we very much make individual leaders heroes, and then we can call each other out a lot against that, those perpetrators. We also have this thing, I think this comes out of that, it's definitely like white supremacy and the notion of command and control, but like long-term planning, like somehow if you can't see 5 years into the future and create a plan towards that, you're not a good leader, which is really a whole interesting mindset that people have. Yeah, thanks to Lisa for that clap. And then our leadership, therefore, reflects the people who are in positions of leadership reflect the people who buy into these sets of values and who have privilege. So it's traditionally white, male, straight, male. Okay. So that's our current status. This is kind of like what it currently looks like. And you know, we could argue this, but let's just take this as the basis. This is a vision for what it could look like in the future. So an economy based on sustainable resource use, instead of competition, a collective economy, this notion of enough is enough. So not everybody has to have a huge business. In fact, like, what does it look like to have a network of a ton of small, really local efforts doing deep work with communities in deep relationship? What does it look like to have an economy built on equity and justice towards liberation? And then what does it look like to have an economy that prioritizes relationship and community? How I would see that bleeding into work would be, you know, there's this responsibility to the triple bottom line. We're seeing some of that language, and we have been for a bit. I'm not entirely convinced that it's operating out of a new paradigm of thought. I think that some people are adopting the triple bottom line language to continue their practices of like maximization because they know that's the language they're supposed to use, right? But generally, it's a step forward. It's definitely a step forward. More decentralization, more trust, more equitable access, relationship. And then for our leadership, like, what does it mean to care for people's well-being? How can we have more autonomous work? If we don't have this sense of needing to like control people or monitor or maximize their productivity, right? There's a lot more freedom to trust the workforce and enable people to work autonomously and remotely. How do we have decentralized authority and decision-making? And then a lot of the work for the future of work and leadership to shift us towards more collective, more equity-based practices is that we have to have a systems and process focus in our leadership. It's less about individual people and heroes and this kind of cult of personality, and more about like, what is the structure? What are the systems? So that we go away from this, like, we celebrate this one person to we celebrate the way this system functions. And then a lot of, instead of that like planning mindset, how do we move towards more adaptation and emergence? Because the world, I mean, if we're not learning this lesson in 2020, I don't know when we're going to learn it, that like things change. You cannot predict the future. So how do you have leadership that understands that and is really comfortable with adaptation and knows some like frameworks to pull on and skills to pull from? And I would argue that those skill sets are people are already inhabiting them. We just don't typically have those people in our traditional positions of leadership, right? So what does it look like to have more liberatory mindsets in positions of leadership, and people who are representative of the people who have been carrying those mindsets? So I would say, like, women of color. How do we have more disabled folks in the center of our leadership? And how do we have, just like, I don't think you can talk about a change in mindset without talking about a change in the people, at first, at least, in my opinion. So that's a vision. Y'all with me on these kind of changes? Okay. All right. So here's what I want you to do for the next 3 minutes, is just kind of fill this out for yourself, right? So what's your vision for the future? What are the paradigms that are uplifted in your vision? What practices are celebrated, and whose voices are centered? We're not sharing this with anybody else. I just want you to kind of make it for yourself. So on a sheet of paper, in your head, whatever, what does the economy look like? What does work look like? What does leadership look like for you? And we'll come back into our space together in 3 minutes at 1:45, but you're just doing this individually. So I'm going to mute myself, and I'll leave this up for you. Finish up your thought. The one thing that feels really important here is that there's a lot of, like, research, and we'll get into some of that in this next session, kind of the trends. But the future of work and the future of leadership is by no means determined, right? And if I were to sit here and say, I would go against what I just said about the fact that we can plan for the future. And it is very important then that we are able to articulate a vision for how we want to show up in our leadership, what leadership would look like to us if it was our ideal, and then the paradigms that would have to be true in our kind of norm of what an economy is and what work looks like, in order for that to be true for ourselves. So we all have a lot of agency, and we all have a part in creating what the future is. And I think it's sometimes just like being able to name and call out what the current model is. And then that way you can shift it forward. So when I quickly go through some of these kind of like trends, if you look at the leadership, at the research, and then I'm going to name a trend, and I'm going to talk about how we currently address it and how we could address it in the future. So here's what they say for future of work and leadership. Here's what's coming. One of the biggest things is automation. So if you've heard this, like the robots are going to take our jobs. This is like a third of jobs they expect to be automated away in the next 10 to 20 years. So the way to think about this is that we'll have higher productivity with less labor. So in the current model, we'd probably think about that as like more people are going to not have jobs, right? Good luck. And people have a real, like, bye, Jessica. Thanks for being here. People have a real fear around that. A possible model that's being uplifted is universal basic income, where we have our labor separated from our income. So this notion that like all people have value, it's not just their labor that creates their value. And if we're generating enough through automation, then we're creating return. We don't necessarily need to just maintain all that return. We can distribute it out. So this distribution of resources and this saying like as a person, this is your value in the system. It's a much more like collective way of thinking about it. I don't know if that's the answer, but that's a answer. Has anybody heard anything else for automation of like a possible model? I'm seeing some no's. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. This one's kind of the biggest one. Others, so the gig economy is only going to grow. There's going to be more role fluidity, the capacity to shift employment. In the current model, what we see a lot of, you see this at like, the Uber or the Lyft, is that we are having people work for low wages and they're not being provided with benefits. That could continue to grow, or we might be able to think through what collective resourcing and advocacy looks like. There's a really interesting group here in North Carolina called the Freelancers Union, and they bring together freelancers and people in the gig economy and help them advocate for group-based healthcare with the state. So doing a lot of lobbying at the public sector level to be able to ensure that people can get access to those kind of public benefits that are typically tied to like full-time employment with an organization. Anybody heard anything else for like a model to really honor gig economy workers? No. It's one to definitely think about, especially as like y'all, Kiva, you're entering the workforce, right? Like how do you advocate for support in that way if folks are not going to hire you on as a W-2 employee, so full-time employee. All right. The next one, there's going to be a greater need for social and emotional skills. So as we have more automation doing the task-based work at an organization or a company, we'll need people who, the skills that we'll need are like creativity, empathy, EQ, and those are only going to continue to grow. The ability to think in complexity, like things that machines can't really do. So if you are thinking about an area to invest in yourself for your work or your leadership moving forward, I highly recommend looking at some of the like social emotional skill-based trainings. It's going to be key. Right now, what that means is that we're like prioritizing the straight white male able mindset in our social and emotional skills. Okay, we don't have to be doing that. So what are social and emotional skills that employ a liberatory mindset or that move us towards greater justice? Are we prioritizing empathy that's rooted in and with an equity lens, right? Are we prioritizing the capacity to understand and filter information? Is the person who's filtering the information a person who has traditionally had access to power and privilege or not, right? Because feedback and whose feedback is listened to, all that, right? This all plays in to how we view social and emotional skills. All right, final one. So there's going to be a continued need for reskilling and upskilling. There's a statistic that like 54% of the existing workforce is going to need to be reskilled or upskilled by 2030. Which means that like what we know today will no longer be what we need to know in the future. And how do we do that? And the current model for that is, go get an MBA, go back to school, complete another 4-year degree, another 2-year degree, right? And those educational programs are very expensive. They also are not accessible to a lot of people. So a possible model, if we really have to reskill or upskill half the workforce in the next 10 years, is that we create free or low-cost education. We create continual learning opportunities like this one. Like, you can hop on a 1-hour whatever and learn something. You can give your employees professional development stipends. You can create an environment where the expectation is that people will continue to learn, instead of an environment where the expectation is that people are experts already and they don't need any continuing education. Right? Yeah, Tiffany's saying states and schools are implementing free higher education. Like, awesome. That's what we need. You see this also, I think the president, like in the presidential race, there was a lot of conversation around free college. We're moving in, I think collectively, that conversation is happening. All right. So those are our trends. Again, these are some of those leadership skills that are key there, really to invest for yourselves if you're able in these kind of building of these skills. Frameworks around ambiguity and adaptation. There's some good stuff in like the agile learning world, etc., that you can dig into. But the more you can invest in these kinds of skills, the better you'll be able to meet the trends that are happening in the workplace, and the better you'll be able to advocate for new policies or practices. I did want to offer these like very tactical, that was kind of like heady theoretical. These are very tactical practices that you can start today that will kind of start to shift things. The first is, it sounds simple, but implementing a check-in round during your meetings. So instead of starting a meeting and just being like, okay, here's what we're doing, a quick question, quick grounding, it doesn't even have to be how are you? It could be like, what's one thing that you're bringing into the conversation today? Right? Every member of your team responds, or they put it in the chat box. That way, every person's voice is heard right at the beginning. It normalizes participation. There's so much research on this. It's really interesting. Or you not believe the difference in how many people tend to speak during a meeting when you implement a check-in round first. So that's an easy one. The second one is to find one workflow or process in your workplace where you can reverse or disrupt the power dynamic of info flowing up, or decisions flowing down, right? So where can you say, actually, we're just going to trust that whoever we're listening to, they have the capacity to make the decision. Doesn't have to be everything. Like, it's not realistic to say like, okay, we're just all of a sudden going to do this, unless you are an organizational leader, which by all means, please consider. But on your team, how do you disrupt that for one process? And then the third one is to really be intentional about building reflection time into your work week. What I mean is like not at night or in the morning before, but noon to 12:30 one time in the work week where you are just going to be reflecting. One of the key pieces of social and emotional intelligence, and even learning, is that we give space for integration. We have to have space to reflect, to be calm, to not do anything, in order to really be able to show up with greater intention. It also helps to start to break that mindset of like, I have to be productive all the time, right? I want to hear from y'all. Do y'all have any practices that you love, or you feel like, okay, this is kind of similar to something that I do for myself?
This is kind of random, but as you were talking, it just reminded me of this book that I read. I don't remember the name of it, but I think it was a Malcolm Gladwell book. And it was they were talking about how this one organization had all of its employees learn all of the different positions in the building, or I'm not completely sure, but basically, it just makes them, more knowledgeable of different skill sets, within the job. And I guess every few months they switch jobs or something like that, and I thought that was really cool. So
cool. Yeah. There are a lot of companies that are doing like role switches or role flexibility, and I think what you're pointing to as well, or what I hear and what you're pointing to, is like it also creates empathy for the other people that you're working with. Yeah, great, thanks. Anybody else?
I just wanted to echo the whole check-in, I think, is important. I know our team is really good about implementing that, and we're a pretty people-focused organization, and anyway, that's just like what drives our work. But we make sure to have that same care and concern that we have for our scholars and alumni with our peers, which I think is really important. So it helps build like a strong work culture, better levels of trust with each other, which I think is really unique. It's the most unique work environment that I've had to date, where we really focus on that.
Yeah, I love that.
It makes a difference.
It does. It's interesting because you see a lot of like social sector organizations have very toxic work cultures a lot of the time. And that kind of makes sense, but it's just like, sometimes I want to say to organizations, like, if you did one thing that you do for these other people internally, it would really help. That like integrity. So anyway, but you unmuted? Okay. I know we're right at time. Just some questions for you to continue to hold as you move forward. But, like, what does this bring up for you? Are you seeing any of these new mindsets and practices being adopted at your current organization? Or for those of you who are looking for employment or thinking about looking for employment, I would say, if these feel like a kind of environment that you'd want to work in, like, start looking for them. Start looking for cues that the places where you're applying are implementing some of these practices. It's one thing for an organization to say they have a particular set of values. It's another thing for them to have processes around it. So look for those processes. And then, my question of like, how can we support you? How can you continue to rely on your alumni community to support you? Who are you asking for support? Who are your trusted friends and advisors? Like, this thing of like, we have to do it alone, that just is not even true, and it needs to go away, right? We have to be asking for help, have to be asking for support, especially if you're looking at like career growth and development. Leaning on people is really, really crucial there. I wish we could dig into those questions, but I want to respect your time. I want to close with this quote by Adrienne Marie Brown, who I always quote, but it really highlights, I think, a lot of what we talked about today. This, we can only trust if we're authentic together. We can only be a force together. We can only be authentic if we can admit we don't know our way out of this. Let this be a verbal toast to more questions, more collaborative ideation, more doubt, more experimentation, more listening to unlikely voices of leadership, more caring, and more connecting each other. So this is from her blog, if you want to follow her work. She's an author and a facilitator, an activist and strategist, who I really think is articulating a lot of this vision of the future. So anyway, my contact information is in that bottom right. Would love to stay in touch with y'all on, email, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. And thank you so much for joining this conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristine. We appreciate it. And if it's okay with you, we'll definitely share out your contact information with everybody. And even, can we get a copy of the slides? Would that be okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll share that with the participants as well. Before everyone goes, I do want to just remind you guys of a couple items that are coming up. One thing that you may have seen in the pipeline, I'm going to put it in the newsletter that's coming out next week, but we do have our Roundtable Represent coming up on June 16th. Normally, this is something that we do in person, but we have moved it to a virtual platform for the time being. Great opportunity for scholars and alumni to come together, and we have various professionals of color that are going to be coming in as well to share their experiences. So more information on how to RSVP for that will be sent out next week. And then also, lastly, just a friendly reminder, if you're trying to work on some professional development during your time at home, we are still offering the Skill Path free licensures. So all you have to do is go to the opportunities page and sign up for that. You get a 1-year access to the platform. There's over 15 different courses that you can complete, receive certificates for, and they're all built around like business soft skills, really that apply to any sector, any profession that you're in. Really good for new grads like you, Kiva, but also anyone who's wanting to brush up on their skills. So just wanted to remind you of a lot of those resources that we are still offering our alumni. So thanks again, Kristine, for the great information today, and I hope everyone continues to stay safe and be well, and let us know how we can help you. So take care, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks for hosting. Take care.